They came from the mist with sails like dragon wings, and left behind silence where prayers once rose. The North Sea that morning was a gray mirror of eternity. Waves whispered against the jagged rocks, and the wind howled through the cliffs as if the gods themselves were warning the living. On the holy island of Lindisfarne, monks and nuns began their prayers with the rising Sunday. Bells chimed softly through the salt air, echoing across the coast like a promise of peace. Sister Elswith moved through the courtyard, her bare feet touching the cold stones worn smooth by centuries of devotion. Her hands, rough from tending the sick and the poor, clutched a small wooden cross. She was 28, old enough to know suffering, yet young enough to believe that faith could still save the world. The ocean was her only companion during those quiet mornings. She often whispered to the sea, believing that even its endless roar could carry a prayer to heaven. But on that morning, the sea whispered back, far beyond the horizon, where the fog thickened and the wind carried the scent of iron and smoke shadows, were forming ships long and narrow with carved beasts on their bows. The first Viking sails. Elswith didn't see them yet. She looked up toward the clouds, wondering why the sky had turned so dark. The old priest, Father Cuthric, stood beside her, his voice trembling as he read from the Book of Psalms. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," he said, unaware that death itself was already crossing the sea. Meanwhile, far from the holy island, Bjorn Ironscald tightened the ropes of his ship. His eyes were pale as the northern ice, unflinching cold. Around him, his men roared with laughter, slapping shields, their breath visible in the chill air. They were hunters of the horizon, sons of Odin and the storm. To them, Lindisfarne was not sacred ground. It was opportunity. Bjorn had heard of this island from traders and raiders before him, a monastery filled with gold, chalices, books bound in jeweled covers, and people who would not fight back. He saw not holiness, but weakness, a soft underbelly of a world too lost in prayers to defend itself. Yet somewhere deep inside a thought lingered. He had seen enough death to know that plundering the sacred might wake something darker than vengeance. Still, he silenced the doubt. The storm in his heart was louder. Back on the island, the nuns sang hymns in the chapel, their voices rising with the tide. Elswith's younger sister in faith, Sister Agnes, smiled shyly and whispered, "The sea is louder than usual today." Elswith nodded, her eyes distant. "Perhaps heaven is warning us." The bell tolled again, 1, 2, 3 times, its tone bending in the wind. On the cliff, seagulls scattered, crying in panic. Then, through the mist, the first shape appeared. At first it looked like a shadow, then like a monstrous fin slicing through fog, and then the dragon-head prow. A shiver ran through Elswith. She dropped her cross. Father Cuthric turned pale. "May the Lord preserve us," he whispered. The horizon was no longer empty. The ships multiplied 10, maybe more, each bearing the black sails of the Northmen. And from those ships, the sound of horns rolled across the sea like thunder. The people of Lindisfarne had never heard such a sound. It was not music, it was a declaration, a promise of what was coming. As the first longship struck the shore, the peace of a century shattered. The monks ran to ring the bells again, their trembling hands trying to drown out the sound of war. Elswith stood frozen, watching the figures leap from the ships, armored men with axes gleaming under the pale Sunday. Their war cries split the air, foreign and primal. In that moment, she understood. This was not just a raid. It was something far greater, a clash between two worlds, two gods, two truths that could not coexist. "What could be worse than death?" she whispered. "For a soul devoted to God." The answer would soon come, not in words, but in fire and fear. This is not just a story about violence. It's a story about faith, despair, and the human soul tested beyond its limits. And so begins the tale of Lindisfarne, the day when light met darkness and faith met the fury of the north. The bells of Lindisfarne had not yet fallen silent when dawn returned the next day. What little remained of calm clung to the horizon like the last breath before a scream. But before the storm truly came, there was peace, pure, fragile, almost sacred. The island woke slowly. The gulls circled overhead, their cries blending with the sound of distant waves. Smoke curled gently from the kitchen fires, carrying the scent of bread and salt across the monastery courtyard. The nuns moved quietly, their robes brushing the cold stone floors as they whispered their morning prayers. Sister Elswith stood in the chapel, her hands clasped tight. The candlelight flickered against her face, painting golden warmth over her pale features. To her, Lindisfarne was heaven on earth, a place where the noise of the world could not reach. Each morning she thanked God for the sea, for the wind, for the rhythm of bells that gave shape to her days. She had lived through famine and disease beyond these walls, through winters so harsh that faith was all that survived. But here, within the monastery, she felt safe, protected, chosen. Outside, Sister Agnes knelt beside the poor who came to the gates, fishermen, widows, children with torn clothes and empty hands. The nuns gave bread and comfort freely. "The sea is generous this week," Agnes said softly. Elswith smiled. "Then so must we be." Everything about Lindisfarne felt eternal. The rhythm of chores, the humble laughter during meals, the chants rising like waves toward heaven, it was a life that promised meaning in its simplicity. But peace has a sound, and sometimes it goes quiet just before it breaks. Far to the north, beyond the silver line of the horizon, the world was different. The sky there was a deep bruise, heavy with clouds that rolled like smoke. Snow clung to the black cliffs of Norway. The air reeked of salt, sweat, and fire. Bjorn Ironskeld stood at the edge of his longship, the wood creaking beneath his boots. The sea was his only god, and it answered to no one. Around him, warriors prepared for departure. They hammered nails into shields, checked the sharpness of their axes, and sang low, guttural chants that sounded like thunder. The drums began slow, steady, echoing across the fjord. Bjorn's voice cut through the noise. "We sail for the west," he said, his tone calm but fierce, "where the priests hoard gold and call it holy." A younger warrior spat into the snow. "These Christians," he muttered, "they kneel to one God and call it strength. But they don't even fight." Bjorn glanced at him. "Never mistake mercy for weakness," he said, his voice low. "A man who fears nothing is not yet alive." The men grew quiet. Even among raiders, Bjorn's words carried weight. He wasn't just a killer, he was a thinker, haunted by something his men could not name. He looked toward the horizon where the sky met the sea. There the mist glowed faintly red, as if the world itself were warning him. "The gods of the north are restless," he whispered. The wind shifted, turning colder. A black raven appeared overhead, circling once before flying west. The crew murmured. The omen was clear. Ravens were the messengers of Odin. Bjorn lifted his head and smiled grimly. "Then we sail with his blessing." Back on Lindisfarne, Elswith paused at the well, feeling a chill that did not belong to the wind. The air had changed heavier, sharper, carrying an edge she could not name. She looked up, seeing dark clouds crawling in from the east. "Storms coming early this season," Father Cuthrick said behind her. His old eyes narrowed at the sea. Elswith nodded, but her gaze stayed on the horizon. "It doesn't look like rain," she whispered. In the distance, a faint echo, a rhythm unlike any she'd heard before. It came and went with the wind like drums, but she told herself it was only thunder. The sisters continued their prayers, the children laughed in the courtyard, and the old priest read from his book. The island looked the same, yet something had shifted, an invisible tremor in the heart of peace. That night, as the sun sank behind the water, a single raven landed on the chapel's cross. It stared westward, unblinking, until the last light faded. The waves grew restless. The wind screamed louder, and the narrator's voice deepened. History remembers this as the day innocence met the storm. The candle flames bent in the draught. The bell swayed, though no hand touched it. Far across the dark sea, the first Viking oars struck the water. The sea struck first. Before dawn, the horizon burned red, not with sunlight, but with the glow of torches carried across the waves. The sound came next, the thud of wooden oars slicing through water, hundreds of them moving as one. The rhythm was relentless, like the heartbeat of the storm itself. From the cliffs above Lindisfarne, the night watchman froze. For a moment, he thought it was a dream. But then the shapes emerged from the fog, dark hulls, dragon heads carved into their prows, sails stained with salt and blood. His voice cracked as he rang the bell. The bell's cry echoed across the island, shrill, terrified, unending. Inside the monastery, candles flickered and fell. The sisters rushed into the courtyard, confusion rising like smoke. "What is it?" one cried. "A storm," Sister Elswith felt it in her bones before she saw it. She turned toward the sea, her breath caught in her throat. "No," she whispered, "not a storm." The air filled with the roar of horns, deep, ancient, terrifying. It rolled over the island like thunder, shaking the chapel walls. Then came the flames. The first longships scraped against the shore, and the Vikings poured onto the sand, iron, and fury and war paint. They shouted in tongues no one on the island understood. The air itself seemed to catch fire as torches landed on the thatched roofs. They came not for gold alone. The narrator's voice trembled, but for something deeper: power, fear, legend. Inside the chapel, Father Cuthric clutched his cross and began to pray aloud. "Lord, deliver us from evil," but his words drowned beneath screams and crashing wood. The doors burst open, smoke and sunlight poured in together, and behind them men with axes. Elswith grabbed Sister Agnes by the arm. "Run, take the children, go to the cliffside." "But what about go?" The courtyard erupted into chaos. Bells clanged wildly, their holy rhythm broken by the sound of metal and fire. The smell of burning wood and salt filled the air. Elswith ran through the smoke, helping the wounded, her habit streaked with ash. A monk collapsed beside her, blood staining the stones. She knelt beside him, whispering a prayer, even as her hands trembled. Through the haze, she caught a glimpse of them, men with wolf pelts on their shoulders, faces streaked with paint. One carried a banner of black and crimson. Another laughed as he shattered a wooden statue of the Virgin with his axe. And at the center of it all stood Bjorn Ironskeld. He walked through the smoke like a creature carved from it. His eyes scanned the burning courtyard, not with joy, but with a cold, distant purpose. Every strike, every cry, every flame, it all seemed part of something he had already accepted. He saw her then. Elswith standing amid the chaos, her cross clutched to her chest, defiant despite the terror around her. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Bjorn stepped closer. "Your God hides behind walls," he said, voice low cutting through the noise. Elswith met his gaze. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced. "And yet, you fear his silence." The moment hung between them, firelight dancing on steel and sweat. It was not a battle of weapons, but of faith. Bjorn's jaw tightened. "Faith doesn't stop fire. Neither does fear," she answered. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes, doubt or perhaps memory. But before he could speak again, a scream tore through the air. One of his men dragged Father Cuthric toward the steps, shouting for orders. Bjorn turned away. The spell broke. "Take what you can," he commanded. "Leave nothing behind." The courtyard filled with motion again, men shouting, the clash of steel, the collapse of burning beams. The sacred and the savage collided in one terrible symphony. Elswith tried to reach the chapel, but the flames rose higher, trapping her inside a circle of light. Smoke stung her eyes. She fell to her knees, coughing, whispering the only words she could remember. "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." The narrator's voice softened as the chaos peaked. The sea wind howled through shattered windows. Bells melted, icons burned, and prayers turned to ash. And still above it all, the sound of the waves, steady, merciless, eternal. Bjorn turned once more toward the sea. His men had begun retreating to the boats, their arms full of spoils. The monastery was collapsing behind them, the flames devouring its sanctity. As the smoke lifted, he saw Elswith again kneeling amid the ruins, her eyes closed, her lips moving in silent prayer. For reasons he couldn't explain, he raised his hand. "Bring her," he said quietly. A warrior seized her arm. She didn't resist. The last bell cracked and fell from its tower, the echo fading into the roar of the tide. And as the longships pushed away from shore, the flames reflected on the water, turning the sea into a river of fire. The narrator's final whisper for this part lingered, and the sea swallowed the light. The flames of Lindisfarne faded into the distance, swallowed by mist and memory. The longships cut through the black water, their oars rising and falling in perfect rhythm, an endless heartbeat of conquest. The captured women sat silently near the center of one of the ships. Their hands were bound, but their spirits clung to what remained of faith. The air was cold, filled with the scent of salt, tar, and fear. Waves slapped against the hull, and every sound seemed to echo across the endless sea. Sister Elswith sat among them, her habit torn her face, pale but calm. She held what little she had left her rosary, carved from olive wood, its edges worn smooth by years of prayer. She whispered words only the wind could hear. "Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus." Her voice trembled, yet each word held strength. Around her, the Vikings laughed, sang, argued, living loudly to drown out the silence of what they had done. But not Bjorn Ironskeld. He stood at the prow, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his hands gripping the wood as if the sea itself demanded something from him. He turned, eyes settling on the woman who refused to break. Elswith sat straight, her chin lifted, her lips moving in quiet devotion. Even in chains, she carried a peace he could not understand. He approached slowly, his shadow falling over her. "Why do you pray?" His voice was rough, almost tired. "Your God didn't stop this." Elswith looked up, meeting his eyes. Her voice was soft, but unwavering. "He didn't promise to stop the storm, only to be with us through it." Bjorn frowned, his expression unreadable. He had seen warriors beg, scream, curse their gods before dying. But never this, never serenity in the face of ruin. He turned away, muttering, "Faith makes fools of us all." Elswith's reply came quiet but sharp. "And yet here you stand, asking questions of a fool." A faint smirk touched Bjorn's lips before fading. He walked back to the edge of the ship, his mind at war with itself. That night the sea grew restless. The waves rose higher, black against the moonlight. The captives huddled together, their whispers lost in the wind. Elswith kept praying, though the cold bit into her bones. She thought of the monastery, the bells, the songs, the laughter that once filled the air. Now it was gone, turned to ash and memory. Her chest ached with grief, but beneath it something stronger stirred. "They can burn the walls," she thought, "but not what was built inside me." Tears slipped down her cheeks, unseen in the dark. She wasn't crying for herself, but for those who had fallen, for Sister Agnes, for Father Cuthric, for the silence left behind. Above deck, Bjorn watched the clouds gather. The storm was coming fast. His crew shouted, scrambling to tie ropes and secure sails. The thunder rolled like 1,000 drums. One of his men yelled, "We must head east, Captain. The wind will tear us apart." Bjorn's jaw tightened. "No, hold the line." Lightning split the sky, illuminating faces twisted in fear. The rain came in sheets, pounding against the deck. The ship tilted violently as a wave slammed into its side. The women screamed. Elswith's rosary slipped from her fingers and rolled toward the edge. She lunged after it, and in that moment, the ship lurched again. She lost her balance. The world spun, and then she was in the sea. The cold struck her like 1,000 knives. Salt filled her lungs. She kicked, clawed, reached for light, but the storm swallowed everything. Bjorn saw her fall. Without thinking, he dove into the black water. The cold nearly stopped his heart, but he pushed through it, following the faint glimmer of her white robe beneath the surface. He caught her arm, dragging her upward, gasping as they broke through the waves. "Hold on!" he shouted, though she was half conscious. The crew hauled them back aboard the storm, roaring around them. Bjorn collapsed beside her, coughing seawater. Elswith lay still, her lips blue, her fingers curled around the rosary she somehow hadn't lost. Bjorn stared at her for a long moment. "You should have let go," he said quietly. Her eyes opened weakly. "Of what everything?" he replied. She smiled faintly, her voice barely a whisper. "Then I'd be like you." Bjorn froze. The words cut deeper than any blade. He rose without speaking, walking back to the prow where the storm still raged. The narrator's voice softened, almost mournful. She had lost everything, her home, her freedom, her world. Yet her faith remained. For her, the worst fate was not death itself, but living without meaning. For him, the worst fate was losing the fight within. As the thunder rolled and the sea raged, their fates became bound. Two souls from different worlds, each searching for something neither could name. Sometimes even monsters remember they were once men. The storm passed, leaving the sea quiet again, too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The waves no longer roared. They only sighed, tired from their own fury. The longships had vanished into the fog, swallowed by the same mist that once carried them to Lindisfarne. When the morning came, the wreckage drifted ashore, broken planks, torn sails, and a single body clinging to life. Elswith. She awoke to the sound of gulls and the faint whisper of wind through the reeds. Her body ached, her hands still clutching the rosary that had never left her grasp. She lay on the wet sand, staring at the gray sky, unsure if she was in this world or another. A shadow fell over her, a man in a brown cloak, his face weathered by time. He was a traveling monk drawn by the smoke that had blackened the sky days earlier. When he saw her, he knelt beside her, whispering, "God be praised." He carried her to a small chapel inland, one of the few places the fire had not reached. For days, she drifted between sleep and waking. In fevered dreams, she saw the faces of the dead, the sisters, the priest, even the fierce eyes of Bjorn. And through it all, she heard the echo of his words, "You should have let go," but she hadn't. When her strength returned, she walked the ruined path back toward Lindisfarne. What she found there broke her heart. The monastery was gone, reduced to stone and ash. The air smelled of smoke and seaweed. Charred bells lay cracked on the ground, half buried in sand, and yet, beneath the ruins, wildflowers had begun to grow. She knelt among them, pressing her hand to the earth. It was still warm, still alive. The narrator's voice softened, filled with reverence. History tells of burned walls and stolen gold, but faith cannot be pillaged. Elswith rebuilt what she could. With the help of survivors and passing monks, she restored a small altar among the stones. Each morning she lit a candle, and each night she sang the same hymn she once sang with her sisters. The island was quiet again, but not silent. Its heartbeat was slower, stronger, and filled with memory. Sometimes she would look out to sea where the horizon blurred into mist. She wondered if Bjorn had survived the storm. She wondered if he remembered her words. Somewhere deep inside, she believed he had. One evening, as the sun bled into the water, a single raven landed on the chapel's roof. It tilted its head, watching her. She smiled faintly. "You again," she whispered. "Tell him I forgive him." The bird cawed, once spread its wings, and vanished into the golden sky. The narrator's tone deepened, intimate and reflective, as if speaking directly to the listener. This is not a story about victory or vengeance. It is a story about what remains when everything else is gone. If you've ever lost something sacred, if you've ever watched your world fall apart and wondered what's left of you, this story is a reminder. The light within you is what no one can destroy. Pause. The sound of wind carries softly behind the voice. Faith isn't found in walls or books or the sound of bells. It's found in the act of standing up again, in kindness, in courage, in choosing to believe when believing hurts. A brief memory of Bjorn flickers his face in the storm, his hand reaching for Elswith in the black water. The narrator continues, "Somewhere out there, a man who once believed only in war saw something stronger than fear, and a woman who had lost everything still believed there was something worth saving. That too is faith." The tone slows, becoming poetic. The sea remembers their names, though time has washed the blood from its waves. The wind still carries their prayers across the northern coast, whispering through the stones of Lindisfarne. Soft, ambient sound waves, distant bells wind through grass. And somewhere across the northern sea, the wind still carries her prayer. The music swells, gentle strings, and a low choir hum fade out